Chicago Blackhawks are one of the best young teams up and coming in the NHL. How did they fare at the rookie tournament? Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks is here to talk about that and the prospect situation in Chicago next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blackhawks, Jack Bushman. And Jack, rookie tournaments underway this weekend. Lots of news for the Blackhawks. How did they fare in this tournament this weekend?
Yeah, it was just fun to see hockey back in action this week, Gil. Even if it is an exhibition between, prospects of the Chicago Blackhawks and the other teams, the Minnesota Wild and the St. Louis Blues, involved in the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase down in St. Louis. But yeah, just really fun to see game-like situation happening after, the long offseason. We were just talking before air about a little how dreadful August can be sometimes. We finally have gotten past that point and getting some game-like situations. But yeah, it was a fun showing for the Blackhawks. My first and biggest takeaway I would have to say is what a strong showing from Frank Nazar up front. He was one of the two probably most notable players on the Blackhawks rookie camp roster, especially the one up front. He was kind of the name in the forward group that most Blackhawks fans had circled. Artem Levshinov was the one on the back end. I know we'll get to him in just a moment, but what we really wanted to see out of Frank Nazar this weekend in the Prospect Showcase was him taking over games, was him being the best player out there for the Blackhawks. And that's exactly what we got. He got off to a phenomenal start on Friday in the opening game. Gil actually drew a penalty and picked up an assist on the Blackhawks opening goal within the first 60 seconds of the game and kept the momentum going from there, had a lot of good puck control. And then actually in their game here on Saturday night, they just wrapped up their second game of the weekend. He had a dominant 3-point performance and really carried them to the victory. So a huge box checked off there with Frank Nazar, really needing to have not only a good rookie camp, but a good training camp to get himself on this Blackhawks opening night roster. It's still an outside chance, but he's put that good first effort and crossed off that box here for this weekend. And outside of that, just getting to see a couple other of the prospects that the Blackhawks have accumulated that we really haven't got to see much looks at these last couple of years. Nick Lardis, someone who was a third-round pick a couple of years ago, had a really strong showing in the opening game. All in all, though, Gil, the thing that stood out to me the most about the Blackhawks this weekend in their 2 games in St. Louis was the pace that they play with. And that's really been a talking point for GM Kyle Davidson since he's taken over in this rebuild. And that's kind of how he's gone about retooling this Blackhawks roster. Is he wants to add speed all up and down the ice. And the Blackhawks have a boatload of prospects that play with great pace and then also size on the back end. The Blackhawks didn't have a lot of their other defenseman prospects because some of them are playing in college hockey or some of them are a little bit older and have surpassed the prospect showcase stage. But even still, the shortest defenseman the Blackhawks had on their roster in this tournament this weekend, Gil, was 6'2". So it's really notable the size that they've tried to add on the back end. And I mean, you look at teams that have won the Stanley Cups in the past 10 years, half decade, most of them, if not all of them, have a lot of size on the back end. So, you don't really care too much about the wins and the losses that come from a prospect showcase like this. It's all about kind of what you're seeing in terms of what the Blackhawks have created in their prospect pool. And what was noticeable to me was the size that they have on the back end and then the speed that they play with. That's a good combo. And I know that's really going to be a focal point of this team whenever, hopefully sooner rather than later, they get back to playing competitive hockey once again.
You mentioned Artem Levshinov. What is the update? I know he's been injured.
Yeah, not an ideal start to his first pro season, of course, after making the leap out of Michigan State, foregoing his sophomore year. He is in a walking boot for the next 2 weeks, according to Elliot Friedman in his 32 Thoughts column that he dropped on Friday morning for Sportsnet. And there could be a maximum of 6 weeks that Levshunov spends off of the ice, which unfortunately would mean he misses all of training camp and the preseason. It's not really going to impact where he's going to start the season, Gil. Odds were that he was going to open things up with the Rockford Ice Hogs in the American Hockey League. He would have had to have, such a standout camp to make the Blackhawks roster. But it just stinks to not get an opportunity to see what this year's second overall pick has in store, right? We obviously saw a lot of good things from him during his freshman season with Michigan State, but we wanted to see what he had for us during the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase this weekend, and kind of getting a little bit of a feel of where he's at against professional competition. I'm sure he was going to get, a couple of games during the preseason. We're not going to get those looks for Artem Levshunov, which is a little bit unfortunate. So I guess he's probably going to be out for somewhere around 5 to 6 weeks, with him being such a pivotal part of this rebuild here in Chicago. Fixture of the blue line. The front office is hoping for years and years to come, right? There doesn't really need to be any rush to bring him back, but not only does it stink that we're not going to see Levshunov probably until the Rockford Ice Hogs open up their season in late October, but it's going to provide more minutes, more opportunities for several players on the back end who are trying to make the opening night roster as well. And with the Blackhawks not really being the deepest on the right side of their blue line, that was a main point in why they drafted Levshunov with the second overall pick. Some of the guys who can play their offside, like Nolan Allen, who we saw this weekend in the Prospect Showcase, Wyatt Kaiser, who's kind of a fringe NHL to AHL player at this point of his career. He's played the offside on the right defenseman slot in the past. So just going to be more opportunities and more minutes in training camp in the preseason for other guys who are really trying to take a job in training camp.
This team has been stockpiling draft picks over the last 3 years at least, trying to rebuild, retool. Who are some players out of this young prospect pool that may be breaking out this year, making the jump to the NHL?
Yeah, there are probably only a couple of guys who could actually, I think, creep their way onto the Blackhawks roster just because of all the moves that they made this offseason, Gil. They brought in a lot of veterans, and quite honestly, you could make an argument that the Blackhawks, with such a deep prospect pool, have a little bit too much of a logjam going on right now. There might not be an opportunity for several guys to kind of creep their way into the NHL spot, but that was kind of done on purpose. I think this front office really wants to make sure guys from the top to the bottom of this roster have to earn their jobs. And I think that, in theory, is what they're hoping is going to help this team take the next step. But as far as some guys I would potentially look at, first and foremost, I talked about him earlier, but I think Frank Nazar is probably the one who I think has the best shot of the youngsters to make this team. And it was so great to see him have the type of performance we wanted to see this weekend at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. Had a phenomenal sophomore campaign with Michigan this past year after missing the most of his freshman year due to a lower body injury, and actually got an opportunity to make his NHL debut, signing his entry-level contract after Michigan was knocked out of the Frozen Four. He scored his first NHL goal. I thought the pace in which he played at was really notable, and just the way that he can play with that high octane speed. He's a really good playmaker, sneaky shot, and very competitive. I really have kind of pinned him in as one of the pivotal pieces of the Blackhawks rebuild. So he's certainly the one that I'm going to be keeping an eye on during training camp, and I know a lot of other people are as well. Another name to throw out there is Colton Dock, Kirby Dock's little brother, former third overall pick, of course, for the Blackhawks in 2019. Colton was a second round pick the year after, and quite honestly, he probably would have made the NHL one of these last 2 years, Gil, for at least his debut or a short stint had he not been berated by injuries, unfortunately. But he's 6'4", 210 pounds, kind of has the same mold as Kirby, but plays more of a true power forward style game. And going into this year, he talked with the media recently and told them that the Blackhawks organization really wanted to see added physicality and kind of almost added emotion out of him out there on the ice. And he really brought that in the Tom Curver's prospect showcase this weekend. And he's even been vocal with the media saying he's like a man on a mission trying to take a job here in training camp. So I love that demeanor. I love that aggressiveness. I think Frank Nazar and Colton Dock are probably two guys to keep an eye out for in terms of prospects that have a likely chance of creeping their way onto the opening night lineup.
All right, Jack, I know you'll have training camp, preseason, the regular season covered every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can check out Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. We're back 5 episodes a week coming next week. Training camps opening up. We got the preseason coming after. So definitely be sure to follow the podcast for daily episodes on the Chicago Blackhawks. You can also check out the show's page on X at @L_O_Blackhawks. And for my personal, right down below at Jack Bushman 2.
All right, Jack, thanks so much.
Thank you, Gil. Always fun.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. In the meantime, you can check out all the great odds at FanDuel, whether it's college football, professional football. Hey, hockey fans, take a look at hockey futures. The season is just around the corner. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com. Check it out today.